I'm going to start with UN Women updates. My name is Civica, and I am the chair of NGO CSW. And before I start, I want all executives to stand up, and I want the Facebook flag to go around the room and maybe here. Where's Ivy? Ivy was here. Pam is there. Jordan is there. Susan, Margarita. There's Ivy. Safira. And I just want to thank them all for being an amazing team, and we're doing a great job this year so far. So thank you all for being here. I also want to thank our office managers, Devin, and our interns. Please stand up. Oh, one intern is downstairs, but thank you all for all the work that you do. Okay. So, according to UN Women, we're already off to a really big start this year. They got 200 written statements. They have over 1,800 applicants already. And when they compare to other years, at this time of the year, this is like 30% more. So that's why it is exciting. And there's one announcement from them that's important. The deadline to register for organizations is January 27. I mean, we obviously have a lot of time, but I know some people have issues with Indico, so don't wait until the last day. Please apply early. So that's from UN Women. And of course, we'll get more updates from them on access. You know, usually as we get closer to CSW, we'll have more solid information. Now, as far as NGO CSW is concerned, let's see. We have an amazing planning committee. I don't want to, maybe we have time. Any co-chairs? Vishnu? I know, but I have a lot to say and I want Q&A times. Planning committee co-chairs, Madeline reception, Ivy conversation circles, Vishnu is the artisan fair handbook, Alexa, Safira is also reception, Margarita is Woman of Distinction Award, Mary Luke over there is Woman of Distinction Award. So if you're planning to join us, there's still time. Our next meeting is December 2nd. You have to be ECOSOC accredited and a member of NGO CSW. Or no, you don't have to be ECOSOC accredited, just a member of NGO CSW to join the planning committee. So come and join us and help us organize CSW 64 Forum. So I'm going to give two specific announcements. One is just about CSW 64 Forum, and then I'm going to talk about generation equality. And I know many of you still have a lot of questions on that, and answer everything. So CSW 64 is going to be a huge event, as we all know. We are doing a lot of the same things. We are going to have consultation day, and it's going to be kick-ass. It's going to be at Apollo Theater. We're changing the format a little bit, although it's still the same. We have discussions, and we have from Sealy, we have member states, and it's 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., maybe 4, and it's $100. We just closed applications on our parallel events, as you all know. 540 applications for 400 spots. Now, I am determined to find more space. I'm not going to guarantee that. I'm hoping there are a lot of incomplete applications, so I don't have to say no to people, because we really do want to give space to everybody. And then after we schedule whoever we can, we'll probably reach out the ones that we didn't find room for and see if we can have them partner with others. And then this way nobody feels left out. Again, so the attempt from our office, from our end, is to really make sure we serve all of you. I was actually at DESA this morning where they were welcoming new ECOSOC accredited organizations. And I don't know if anybody remembers when they first became ECOSOC accredited, everybody was nervous. How do I engage? And how do I speak with UN people? And I gave them the example of CSW. And years ago, CSW used to have parallel events within the UN just like CSOCD does right now when they're meeting, they rent rooms. Well, we got so big that, you know, they didn't give us rooms anymore. We created our own rooms. Even more parallel events than UN System does. UN System of UN CSW has a limit of 250 events, and over the last few years we kept raising and raising to 400. I mean, of course, you also understand that there's a limitation to what we can do. Even if I do find rooms, there's going to be a certain time where we can't do more than 500, because even at 400, people complain that there's just so many parallel events. I don't mind the music, by the way, everybody, don't worry about it. It just gives me cadence to like get into the groove and speak with the music. So that's parallel events. We're definitely going to have a reception Tuesday evening. It's going to be at the New Yorker Hotel, and if you were there last year, you don't want to miss it. Yeah.
If you weren't.
If you were, well, exactly. It's because we do sell out very fast. We have only 500 limit to that space. The tickets are not going to be available for a while. I think we're waiting. We're just taking a deep breath and, like, you know, dealing with parallel events, and then we'll make consultation day tickets available first once I have a blueprint of the program, and then we'll do reception, and, you know, of course, Artisan Fair will be available to apply to. Speaking of Artisan Fair, this year we are doing something a little bit different. Instead of trying to squeeze into the second floor and, you know, squeeze in the hours, maybe extend as much as possible, we are going to the Armenian Convention Center, the big ballroom, on Thursday. We're renting out that whole space, and there's going to be an artisan fair for, I hope, over 100 civil society organizations, where they're going to sell their goods from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Did I say?
Yeah.
Yes, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it will be open to public, so people can come in and make lots of money for these organizations. And speaking of the large ballroom at ACC, we are also renting that space for 3 days on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to have something called conversation circles. This is an NGO CSW planning. It's our own event. It's not open for applications. It's not something that people can try to get space in to do their own events, but it is for all to participate in what it is that we're planning. So we already have scheduled, what's the word? Well, yeah, we have scheduled a discipline, a format for, well, anyway, no. We have scheduled an organized panel or discussions. It's not panels, it's discussions, round for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, based on the 6 thematic groups. And by now you'll know 6 thematic groups that we're negotiating, advocating during CSW. So that room, there's also open space in between the nations. And when it comes together better, we'll have like we already have the description on the web, but we'll have more explanation on what it is that we're doing as it becomes clear to us as well. But this is really, it came out of the idea that we have so many organized panel discussions. Is remind you that the application is open. We do this an airline and here, so please reach out to your networks, choose somebody from each region, and my recommendation is, or we're going to give importance to applications from diverse backgrounds, meaning, or diverse representation, meaning LGBTQI, disability, young, old, widow. Each region can represent a different aspect of a woman who has done the work in that field and needs to be recognized for it. So 5 women of distinctions will win the award this year. I know it's like jumping, but I'm very, very excited about it, and I'm so excited that the co-chairs Margarita and Mary are on board, and they're doing an amazing job. So yeah, please underline that. The applications will close soon, so send those in. let me stop for a minute and see if there are any questions about UN Women or NGO CSW, and then we'll kick off the generation equality updates.
Can I have my water? No.
All right, I guess I explained things well. Okay. Okay. Please don't judge me, I forgot my water bottle. Okay. Now, let's head into generation equality. How many people here have not even heard about it yet? Wow. Generation Equality Forum is what UN Women, in partnership with France and Mexico, kicked off last CSW. They made the announcement, and then over the summer they gave us more information about what it is all about. So I want to really take time to explain this again. Even if you have heard it, you know even more than I do. We're getting so many questions that I apologize for those that's going to sound like repetition. I just want to describe it again. So many of you knew what the CSW system is all about. You know, 25 years ago, Beijing Platform for Action was agreed upon, and since then, every year, CSW Bureau, there are 5 member states and lots of members come together and they pick a topic, they ask civil society to collaborate with them, and we discuss that topic. We've done rural women, we've done health, we've done all kinds of topics, but it's all based on the Beijing Platform for Action. And every year we work really hard, and we really have achieved a lot. We know we have achieved a lot. But we also know that there's been a lot of pushback, and there's been a lot of issues where we're just not getting what we need, right? So UN Women was starting to get concerned about all the work that everybody was putting into this process, and we were not getting as much out of it. Because you can all also vouch for that. We work so hard to get success stories, and then a lot of times we're just settling. We're just negotiating it down. Last year is a perfect example. Ambassador Mason did an amazing job. She got an amazing agreement, and then at the closing session, Saudi Arabia and a few other, it doesn't matter, but it is on record. It's on UN Web TV, where quite a few member states spoke and said, we cannot agree with these agreed conclusions. So it just weakens the document, and it weakens the work that we had done. So UN Women said, okay, and the way I've been describing it in the last, what I think they decided to do, they said, why don't we take this process a little bit outside of the UN, like corporations do with retreats. Like, you know, let's just have a retreat. Let's just come and meet in other locations and see what we come up with. But let's do it where it's completely civil society driven, which is one of the things that we've been complaining about. Civil society doesn't have a seat on the table. You're not listening to us. If you don't work with us, you're not going to achieve anything. So they're saying, okay, civil society, here's the platform. We're going to get member states to partner with us, but you're going to be in charge on gathering the information, in making sure all of civil society is engaged, and everybody's being heard, and then you make recommendations on what it is that we should do. More importantly, how can we achieve it? Because we keep saying that we, civil society, are the experts. We know what we're doing, so listen to us. And now UN Women is saying, okay, here's the table, gather, talk, and tell us what we can do. So that happened early in June when UN Women chose NGO CSW to convene the civil society conversation. Now, if you go to UN Women website, Beijing +25 page, there will be a deck that explains to you what their plan is. Their plan is to have a core group. They partnered with France and Mexico. They're going to meet in Mexico and Paris next year after CSW. That they want us to consider, because those are cross-cutting issues. Any issue you want, you can find in one of those thematic groups. So don't say my issue's not in there and I'm not being heard. Find a way to get in there. And then they want us Okay, so they have the core group, which is UN Women, France, Mexico, and civil society. They have a strategic group that they meet with different stakeholders. They have youth group. They have their own groups of people that they're meeting and consulting with. But the group that I believe is the most important, that UN Women gave us the power, is that one person on the core group, the civil society, is actually representative of all of us. So because we were in charge, we figured out different ways of gathering these civil societies, and we started by just, ask your friends to join advisory working group. We needed to pick 21 people from the advisory working group so that one of us could go to the core group. The advisory working group is up to about 370 people right now, and it is still open. If you want to be engaged in this global conversation, send us an email to beijing25@ngocsw.org or info@ngocsw.org. We'll find you, we'll add you on the advisory working group. Our next meeting is Tuesday, 10 a.m. We meet via Zoom, and we bring information from the core group, but more importantly, we want information from you. There's a form that we ask you to fill out. You don't have to. It all depends on how engaged you are, how engaged you want to be, how much of an advocate you want to be. You can also just be a listener. You can just step in there, listen to see what's going on globally. But the point is that we're gathering information, we're hearing from all of you on what we want done in the next 5 years through the action coalitions. So this process of consultancy, UN Women meeting in Mexico, and then in Paris, is going to create something called the action coalitions. The action coalitions is nothing new. It's what we do at UN all the time. When we want to achieve something, we partner with member state, other stakeholders, civil society, and we accomplish things. So but again, we're going to do this at the retreat. Again, my word. Or at the forums that generate that. The retreat is actually the Generation Equality Forum. And CSW is a big part of it. The CSW will always be a big part of it, because a lot of people are like, why are we doing this? What's going on with CSW? Is it going to end? Because some member states have considered actually taking some power away from CSW. But we're not going to let that happen, because CSW 64 is important to bring all of this consultation into, and CSW 65 is going to be even more important to bring what we're achieving back into, and then hopefully continue in a stronger way than we've been doing. And maybe even scare some member states who are not champions of gender equality to say that you don't want to join us, we'll get things done in our own way, and you will be left out of all the achievements that we're going to get. So we're consulting with the advisory working group. And by the way, some of you are with our study group. That is definitely part of this whole picture as well. Whatever you come up in our study group will be fed into the advisory working group, or actually the thematic groups. And let me come into the thematic groups. Is everybody still with me or lost? Should I? Oh, okay. Should I stop for a minute or? Okay, I'll just finish up with the thematic groups. I know you have 1:30. The thematic groups actually came out of the advisory working group, and we put out a call. These are all on our websites. All the minutes are on our website, so you can take your time and read them. But again, we're getting so many questions that I feel like repeating. So there's 6 thematic groups, and there's about 2,000 people already volunteered that they're going to go into their own sections and discuss the thematic groups. All of this consultation is going to feed into CSW 64, where on consultation day we will announce the 6 recommendations from each thematic group, and then discuss it for the next 2 weeks. You will get more information as we get closer to CSW. And I'm actually tired of talking, so I'm going to stop for 1 second and see if there's any urgent questions. Otherwise, you will get the minutes and just read our newsletters. All of this information is in it. Any questions? Yes.
What is the criteria for those who are interested in participating in the Mexico and France
Okay, the criteria to participate in Mexico and France. You will find this on UN Women website as well. From my understanding, there's going to be funding to bring civil society into these groups. Mexico is only 2,000 people, and the Mexico meeting is about experts who are going to dig into the recommendations. You know, so it's not going to be really open to everybody. You can apply. Some of you will get funding, but it's really only 2,000 people. But there will be opportunities to participate virtually, and we'll make sure that you have all that information. Paris is limited to about 5,000 people, and Paris is going to be all about celebrating and really holding action coalitions accountable. By the time we get to Mexico, France, UN Women mostly, and Mexico will have recommendations on who's going to be part of the action coalitions. They're only welcoming champion states. Not everybody can join these groups. You can't be anti-LGBTQ, anti-feminist, anti-women's rights, you create the list and join these action coalitions. You have to be a champion for gender equality. And again, you will get more information as we get closer to those dates. Thank you so much. Anything else? Okay, now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to two of our executive committee members, and one should be online, I think.
Yeah, she's joining on Zoom.
She's on Zoom?
Zoom hasn't started.
Okay, so Margarita and Rosa put together this amazing panel. I personally can't wait to just sit back and enjoy your presentations. I'm so excited. It's a focus on violence against women and girls, and we are so happy to have all of you here. I'll hand the mic over to my colleague and friend and sister, Margarita, to take over.
Thank you very much. I guess you all released me of even giving the smallest treasury report, so I will not.
I'm sorry.
I will not. If you have any questions about how you're doing treasury-wise, you're doing fine. The insurance are updated. For certificate of insurances, the down payments for all the venues are done, so we're okay. So now we can go into. If you have any questions, catch me later. Your mic isn't working. Oh, it isn't?
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce my buddy here in whatever work, Daniela Philipson-Garcia. She is the Women's Economic Justice Program Assistant at the Feminist Task Force, where she works with women's organizations and networks to advocate for financing for gender equality globally and at the United Nations in New York. In addition, she works as a consultant for civil society in her country of origin, Mexico, on how to prevent and end femicide. Previously, Daniela worked as a legislative advisor for the President of the Mexican Senate, where she led research and drafted legislation on drug policy, military and police reform in order to help end the war against organized crime. There's more here. Do we have it in our program or not? But I think I'm going to give her the mic and I will sit down and listen.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to this panel today. If I can please ask the panelists for today to join me at the front of the table. One will be joining us remotely from Mexico City, and she will connect via Skype. But yes, thank you very much for joining us. I think we're missing one more person. Should be here shortly. So as you know, today's panel is on violence against women and girls. And to kick us off, we have Mishka Martin, who is a advocacy and a policy advisor for Plan International. She has many years of experience working both at the grassroots level and in the international level, and all the levels in between as well. She has a lot of experience working on youth-led movements, including you were a youth advisor in Uganda for ActionAid International, as well as a youth engagement advisor at UNFPA, Pacific Sub-Regional Office. And to start our conversation, I want to briefly remember yesterday. Yesterday was the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And in the General Assembly, we heard 15-year-old actress Millie Bobby Brown talk about cyberbullying, about bullying, especially against girls, and about these harmful practices that tend to have girls at the center, usually. And so I would like to ask you to share us more about youth-led movements, about your experience working on harmful practices against girls, and how these movements can really push us to take action. So thank you so much, Mishka, for joining us. And
hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much to NGO CSW for inviting Plan International, myself, to be part of these discussions and recognising violence against girls as an explicit form of gender-based violence. And so today I would like to talk a little bit about some harmful practices, perhaps the most pernicious forms of harmful practices being female genital mutilation and cutting, and early child pregnancy. But just before I get stuck in, I was very happy to see Millie Bobby Brown talk about cyberbullying. Plan International has done a lot of research in that regard, and we're really seeing the internet and cyber spaces as these new platforms in which violence is being perpetrated against girls. And so we need to cultivate ways to reclaim those spaces, because the internet is so frequently becoming the place in which girls organise, collectively come together, strategise against gender inequality and different forms of violence. And so how do we protect those spaces, and what governments can do, I think, is a pertinent question to talk about, but perhaps another day for discussion. So, as was introduced, my name is Mishka. I'm a policy and advocacy advisor at Plan International. I focus specifically on girls' rights. Prior to that, I was working with young women and girls within the Pacific region for UNFPA, so trying to mobilise resources and government commitments to essentially end early pregnancy and other marked areas of gender inequality within the region. And then more recently, I have been working within the United States, consulting for a number of organisations where there's just this growing need as large institutions are realising that programs are not enough, and that there needs to be this upstream effect, there needs to be policy and advocacy focus, really helping to build capacity at the grassroots level and also at the international level within institutions and organisations themselves. But just to take a back step, I think it's important to talk about these harmful practices, as an explicit need to control women's bodies. In the case of FGM, which I'll talk some about, there's this belief that by mutilating girls' genital organs, her sexuality will be controlled and her virginity will be maintained for marriage. Gender inequality and discriminatory social, cultural and religious norms relating to girls' and women's positions in the family, community and society underlie these harmful practices of FGM and also early child marriage. Early child marriage itself forces girls into adulthood prematurely. It has a negative impact on all areas of their lives, violating their sexual and reproductive health and rights, curtailing education, limiting autonomy, and exposing them to an increased risk of violence. There's a lot of evidence to show that 1 in 3 adolescent girls aged between 15 and 19 who are in informal unions have been victims of violence. I think that we hear this statistic all the time, 1 in 3 women, But when you talk about 1 in 3 15 to 19-year-old girls, they've probably only been married for a few years, so I think we can extrapolate and see exactly how high the level of violence is within these young girls' lives. But I'm actually not going to spend too much time talking about the harmful practices themselves. I'm looking around the room, I'm seeing a high level of knowledge, engagement, and probably expertise on these issues themselves. So today I would like to spend some time talking about actually the international legal frameworks that pertain to adolescent girls and their protection. And then Plan International, they have done a lot of research at the international and regional level, really looking at these international legal frameworks and the extent to which they explicitly speak to girls. And it's not much, but I'll touch on that at the moment. And then before turning to what we see as some really promising practices coming out from our programs and the research that can provide us with direction as advocates and activists in terms of where we should really invest our resources and our time working on harmful practices and where we need to be pushing and advocating countries to do so. So as was noted, this is all very timely given that there was the commemoration on the Convention on the Rights of the Child just yesterday. There was a lot of NGO engagement, civil society activity happening in and around the UN headquarters, and simultaneously a lot of member states showing up and making pledges and making their commitments. But it's worth noting that the adolescent girl actually is often quite invisible from these international legal frameworks. Seldom are girls actually mentioned as a specific group. And where they are, their unique and specific challenges and predicaments that they face are not fully reflected. It is interesting to note that actually nowhere in the Convention on the Rights of the Child is there any reference to gender. It was written some time ago, or to the specific position of girls, and girls are thus rendered somewhat invisible. Also, we find that harmful practices specifically, which in most cases affect girls, are dealt with only very briefly under Article 24. And this is concerning the right to the highest attainable standard of health, rather than being given separate consideration. Then we find in CEDAW, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, there are still 48 states among the 189 that have ratified that have reservations, many objecting to Article 16. And this sets out that women and girls have the same rights as men and boys in family life and marriage, and stipulates that child marriage has no legal effect. So it's really these intersectional marginalisations that reinforce one another and result in further denial of girls' rights. And so it's actually this reason that in 2017, Plan International actually decided to focus quite specifically on the adolescent girl. So there's many decades of experience working with children, working at various levels, but it was because of this grave gap that you see actually not just in the international legal frameworks, but also in policies and programs across the whole, where adolescent girls are just falling through the cracks. So part of my role is to monitor the third committee, and just 2 days ago we saw the passing of the annual resolution on the rights of the child. And in the days leading up to that, we saw an amendment being put forward by the United States to remove language around a child's right to sexual and reproductive health. And so this strikes at the very heart of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. These well-established norms of a child's right to education and health are in question by removing this kind of language. And we saw that many countries, or I think in the final vote, 100 countries voted to reject the amendment, and 30 were supportive, and the rest abstained. And I know that this is a familiar story that we're seeing all over the world. For those people who were following ICPD just last week as well, we had the same sorts of attacks put up against women's bodily autonomy. But in terms of the resolution on the girl child, the third committee actually decided not to open that up at all. It was just considered the rights of the child. The negotiations went on far longer than what they had forecasted, with so much contentious debate happening. And so the rights of the girl child, rightly or wrongly, just weren't debated in this third committee session. So some people would say that perhaps it was a good thing in terms of it not being open to further dilution or further watering down, but fundamentally it's a missed opportunity for countries to recommit and to scale up their efforts. But as we're marching towards Beijing 25, I think it can be agreed that this alliance is growing in strength, and there's a need really to devise new strategies in how we broach this more powerful alliance that we're seeing. Okay, so with all that aside, I actually want to spend the rest of my talk talking about what is working in eliminating harmful practices. I feel that often with the complexity of these insidious practices of gender-based violence and how deeply ingrained they are in customs and traditions, it tends to overshadow the fact that there are some solutions that are emerging and that culture can actually evolve. And the data tells a very compelling story about where we need to invest and direct our efforts as gender advocates and activists on the ground. Can I check how we're going for time? Okay, so let's be there. And I'm happy to circulate this to anyone that's interested afterwards or to have one-on-one conversations. But I want to just point out a study that's been done across the Asia Pacific that draws on not just Plan International's own evidence, but also 10 to 14 years of experience of implementing policies and programs on eliminating child marriage and also other harmful practices, including FGM. The strongest recommendation that has emerged from this research was the desperate need to contextualise and localise the program for the intended community. A one-size-fits-all approach is simply not going to work, particularly when we're talking about FGM and child marriage. And so it must start with undertaking a thorough mapping of who are the key populations, which girls are most at risk, even within a given country, because it's going to be diverse depending on the particular group of girls you're talking about within a country context. And understanding exactly what are the drivers and where the support is for child marriage to inform a targeted approach. The other piece of evidence that is unequivocal is that we need to be working across development sectors, breaking down silos and working with the family, the community, regional and at the national level. So it needs to be holistic and it needs to be multi-level. This is also true of FGM. Locating the particular drivers is crucial for designing targeted and effective campaigns. And so an example of this is the UNICEF data that people might be familiar with that shows that girls who have mothers who are uneducated are much more likely to have been cut, underscoring that education as a strategy to provide this catalyst is so important in breaking the cycle of FGM, but also working really closely with mothers. And when they do have children who are girls, they are going to be highly at risk. And so working with them in an intensive way is also an important diversion strategy. And so then, just to give you an example of how Plan is working with the community, we've been working in Guinea, in rural communities to bring together the whole community to abolish FGM. And they use a gradual and a highly structured approach based upon generational dialogue that respects the sort of hierarchy within that given community. And so they work closely with the Imam, which is the Muslim leadership, who has been a really strong ally in convincing the rest of the community members to abandon FGM. And so the research shows that if the practicing community themselves abandons FGM, then the practice can be eliminated very, very quickly. This isn't to deny the importance of policy and legislative frameworks, but this must go hand in hand with multi-level community approaches. Okay. I'm going to wrap up there. I'm happy to talk more about solutions in a given space after today or whenever. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Mishka, for drawing attention to the girl child and especially issues concerning adolescent girls. It was very enlightening to understand what is happening now and also understanding what works. I'm glad we closed on a positive note with your presentation. And next up we have Marta. Marta is a senior advisor for the Behavioral Insights team, which she will talk a little bit more about what that is, as well as what are behavioral insights. But Marta has worked with the prosecutor's office in the government of Chile, as well as with the UNDP in Georgia, working precisely on issues related to violence against women and girls. And Marta is also publishing a report on Monday with the Inter-American Development Bank, precisely addressing these issues and how behavioral insights can improve the services provided to domestic violence survivors. So please, next up, Marta, if I can invite you to use that microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you to all of you for attending this panel, to see the NGO CSW committee for organizing and for inviting us to participate. Really glad to be here with you all and be able to share some of the lessons and the insights we've gathered through working on these issues. So as Danny was mentioned, I work at the Behavioral Insights team. We work on applying behavioral science that covers the diverse disciplines such as behavioral psychology, anthropology, or neuroscience to a more nuanced model of human behavior, of how do we behave in practice, in reality, and how can we use those insights to design better social policies, social programs, and in this case, I've worked, as Danny mentioned, a lot on applying this methodology to intimate partner violence. And I'm going to present a couple examples of the work we've done in Australia and in Georgia of how this methodology can improve existing policies on this area. So first of all, on what is behavioral science, as I was mentioning, not one discipline, but combines multiple disciplines studying human behavior. We study how we deviate from a rational model of decision making. Traditional public policy, traditional economics is based on the assumption that we are all hyper-rational human beings. When we're going to make a decision, we weigh what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the benefits and costs, and decide the most rational course of action. Behavioral science studies how we deviate from that model, how in many cases we are influenced by our environment, what are the social norms in the communities we live in, what are our own cognitive or behavioral biases, and we try to apply that to design better policies that have improved outcomes for the populations we are serving. Behavioral science is based on a lot of work developed, initiated in the 1970s by Daniel Kahneman and Anna Tversky, and they conceptualized that our mind works in a two-system level. On the one hand, we have the system one, that is the automatic decision making. Is, for example, when I go to work every morning, I don't even think about my commute. If I tell you 2 by 2, you are immediately able to tell the answer. Well, system two is the more reflective or deliberative. When I'm going to put out a trip overseas, I take way more time to make those decisions. And according to the findings from behavioral science, we rely way more on system one than we previously thought. And there are many heuristics and biases that influence how we make decisions, and that we could leverage to design, in this case, better policies and social programs. As a quick example of how this is important and what is the practical application of all this psychology and economics literature, this is an experiment conducted in Australia that is on what is the impact on how do we present, in this case, the defendant on a jury, and how does it affect decision making. This was a series of mock trials in which they presented to a jury the same case, the same defendant, the same victim, the same arguments and same evidence, and they just modified how the defendant was presented. In some cases, it was presented in a glass cage, that is what normally happens in Australia. In other cases, it was presented in an open dock, that is more the British model. And then finally, in all the cases, it was presented in a table sitting next to their lawyer, which is commonly the model here in America. So just changing that small design setting in the decision-making environment led to these startlingly different results on the proportion of jurors that declare the person guilty. So in that regard, it's a small example of how these can have real consequences and impact on the effectiveness of the policies we implement. We, as I was mentioning at the beginning, we started as a government unit within the British government in 2010, but since we've spun out of government, we now work in more than 30 countries, applying to this methodology to complex social challenges, including gender-based violence. And I think we can move forward directly to the example. Yes. Okay, so firstly, I'm gonna start with experience we had working in criminal justice in Australia. In this case, this was experience with the restraining orders, in this case, in Australia, the apprehend domestic violence orders, that the problem is, or the main issue in this policy is that there is a high level of breach. Like in many cases, there are restrictions not respected, and compliance with these measures that aim to protect survivors of domestic violence are not really being as effective as they should. So one of the challenges we found was that those orders, the language, as it normally happens with many government communications, was highly bureaucratic, highly depersonalized, not necessarily that easy to understand. We did some reading tests, and you needed at least 13 years of education to be able to fully understand the instructions or that restraining order. So we worked with the courts in Australia to modify those orders and try to make as simplified a language as possible to provide also the, in this case, the perpetrators that were given these orders with clear instructions of what are examples of what you can, what you cannot do, and also to incorporate messages directed at changing social norms. So trying to denormalize violence, conveying the message that most relationships do not entail violence and abuse. In this case, most of the changes made here are based on sound evidence, on what are, for example, things like personalization that we know work, and there's a lot of research from marketing, but also public policies on the impact of personalizing communication, addressing you as you, John Smith, rather than you, the defendant, and how those small changes can then affect behavior. These orders have since, the redesign model has since been rolled out nationally, and is now like the new standard of how these communications are sent out to defendants, with the objective, in this case, of reducing the proportion of orders that there are breaches. In Georgia, we can move a few in the interest of time. Yes. In Georgia, we worked, as Danny was mentioning, with the United Nations Development Program. In this case, we were trying to address the behavior of bystanders, not as the previous example that I was describing was focused on the behavior of the perpetrators. In this case, we were focusing on the behaviors of the community. What is, I think in many cases, interventions in this space overly focus in the survivor of a violent relationship and not necessarily or not always address the community and environment that they live in. So in this case, we try to, at first, all of how we normally work in our methodology, behavioral science relies very much on being tailored to the context and understanding what are the barriers and what are the bottlenecks and what are the factors that are preventing change. So we did a lot of qualitative work with the community, with different communities in Georgia, on why do you act or don't act in front of a situation of violence. Like, do you know someone who may be in a violent relationship, and what is preventing you from taking action in support of that person? And in many cases, this is on the left side is a lot of what we heard in interviews with survivors of what are their impediments to seek help, but also on the right side, in the next one, is some of the barriers found for the bystanders. That is, in many cases, there's the belief that this is a private matter, that you shouldn't intervene. There's also disappointment or the expectation that it won't matter, that it won't make a difference whether I intervene or not. And also the lack of knowledge of what can I do from my position to help this person that is in a violent relationship. And in this case, this is the bystander model. You can move forward. And a series of the behavioral biases and barriers that can affect the moment from a bystander knowing that something is happening till the later stage that is taking action. We are working, we developed 2 projects with UNDP Georgia. The first one focused on assuming that degree of responsibility and changing attitudes or getting people to decide to take action. And the later one in how can we help bystanders to identify what form of assistance can I give and actually implement. So with the first one, we tested different messages. They had the UNDP program in Georgia had a number of communication campaigns going on Facebook, and there's a lack of evidence on what are the effective messages for people to take action. So we tested different versions of, in this case, it's the English version, the originals that were in Georgia, but testing what messages would be most helpful to mobilize people. And in this case, we measure who actually clicks through, tries to get more information about how they can help survivors of violence. And we tested messages on social norms based on the hypothesis that we are all influenced by what people in our communities, people around us do. So conveying people that the majority of people in Georgia think you should intervene when there's a situation of violence. We also tested messages more around the perception, and I think part of the social norms was trying to address that perception that intimate partner violence is private and that you shouldn't, it's not your business, but conveying people that objective norm, that the majority of people think you should intervene. We also tested the message around helplessness of how showing people how having a friend, having someone who knows about this can make a difference for someone, particularly in the case of intimate partner violence is an inherent part of this issue, the isolation that survivors are subject to. So trying to convey potential bystanders that message of being there, having someone for people in this kind of situation can actually make a difference. And address that concern of nothing that I'm gonna do is gonna change things. And further, we also tested addressing 2 different knowledge gaps. One around was, how can I provide emotional support? What should I say? How should I interact with the survivor? And the other one was around, how can I redirect this person to services. What is out there for survivors of violence, in this case in Georgia? So I think if we move forward, we have the results. These were the ads. And in the results. So on the results, what we found in this experiment was that people prefer providing emotional, or were more appealed by the messages that talked about emotional support than institutional services, which I think makes sense in general. If we all knew someone who was in a situation like this, you generally try to provide support yourself before redirecting them to the police, to shelters, or to other resources. And then also the social norms message, rather than the helplessness message, was effective in getting people to enact change. So what we did with these initial findings is now we're taking it to a larger intervention in the field. We're working with the Ministry of Justice on how can we know these messages that we know have been proved effective or are more effective than others in prompting people to action, for people to take these offline and to actually enact behavior change and provide survivors with support. This is one of the players we're developing. Sadly, it's in Georgian, but the headline message is on that social norms message of the majority of Georgians think you should intervene in a situation of violence. It also provides instructions of what to do around active listening, not judging the survivor in this case, and also clear calls to action on what services can you redirect your survivors to. Then in this case, we talking to our counterparts in Georgia, we decided that probably the best gatekeeper was they have a national hotline for domestic violence survivors, so that redirecting them to experts that then can help them the often complex system of help for survivors. So now we are evaluating the impact of this intervention. We are actually measuring, implementing in some municipalities, not others. We normally use randomized control trial, rigorous evaluations to measure what is the impact and make progress in what Mishka was mentioning about what actually works in the space. And we hope to have results early next year, but we are measuring whether these interventions in the community, providing these materials and these targeted measures, actually increase reporting of intimate pattern violence and reduce the proportion of survivors in those municipalities that we are implementing this intervention, whether we see an increase in calls to the national hotline.
Thank you very much, Marta. And for something Marta really highlights in her discussion on behavioral insights, the behavioral insights really can add a lot to traditional public policies, how traditional public policies are designed to address violence against women and girls, and how behavioral insights really enhances those current traditional public policies. So thank you very much. And next we have our panelist from Mexico City who's going to connect with us via Skype. Her name is Mónica Meltis, and Mónica Meltis is the executive director of a human rights data-driven organization. It's a nonprofit organization called Civica. And Mónica has spearheaded a lot of advocacy efforts in Mexico. She has worked with the families of missing persons during the current war against organized crime in Mexico. She's worked with the families to bring them justice and to bring them dignity. And she's also currently leading a project on how to prevent, track, monitor femicides in Mexico, eventually so that civil society can work with the government in Nuevo León, Monterrey to eradicate femicides in Nuevo León, Monterrey. So for our question for Mónica, as soon as we get her on the screen, can she hear us? Hi. Hola, Mónica. So for our question, I want you please to talk to us about methodologies that are being used currently in Mexico, because Marcela Lagarde defined femicide as the killing of a woman for the reason of being a woman. And this is measured in very different ways across criminal codes in Mexico and in different states, and that is a problem when it comes to prosecuting these crimes. So Mónica is going to talk about the importance of data in measuring and preventing femicides in Mexico, and what can be done, and how civil society can be involved in this work. So it's up to you, Monica. Thank you.
Hi, you listen? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear the screen.
Would you like to turn the camera on, or are you okay?
I think it's already
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Monica.
Hi. So first of all, thank you, Dani, for the introduction, and thank you for all of you for inviting me. As Dani said, I work at an NGO that's called Civica, where we use data and statistics for human rights, and we have been working a lot on trying to understand how the femicide violence works in Mexico. As Dani also said, the definition of a femicide it has been used in Mexico and in Latin America as a political tool. Not that this has any bad on that, but when we're trying to talk about data, it is hard to understand femicide as the data is today. Because in Mexico we have 32 states that have different laws and different constitutions. And this means basically that we have 32 definitions of what each state defines as a femicide. Which means that when we try to look to the data, it is very hard to compare how femicides in Nuevo León, for example, compare to femicides in Mexico City because they have different legislations. So what we have been trying to do is to generate a new way of identifying femicides in the data. And we have been finding different things. First of all, that femicides are, and from now on I'm going to talk about homicides, and we classify this as violent deaths in Mexico. So we have two major data sets in Mexico to understand or to have an approximation to this phenomena. The first one is the one generated from the national system of the public security force. That is a data set that has investigations, and within each investigation we can have more than one victim, which makes it very tricky to understand how many women have been murdered. In the other hand, we have a data set that produces the forensic doctors. So the data is that it has 1 year. They publish it 1 year after. So, for example, today they have just recently published the information for 2018. So we have these two big data sets with different problems, each one. And we have been working with the second one, with the one that produces the Health Institute in Mexico, because it is a data set that allows us to understand more of the physical characteristics that have been found on the bodies of the women that have been murdered, which allows us also to understand how has this murder happened, no? So while doing this, we have 3 or 4 major conclusions. The first one is that the femicide violence or the murder homicide violence that women have been suffering in Mexico in the past 20 years, it has had an effect. It is not an isolated effect. So all of the institutions in Mexico, and I think most of them around the world, are generated to tackle the typical femicide violence. No? That is this type of violence that is generated typically or traditionally at home, at the private spaces. It has been perpetrated by sentimental or romantic partners or family. It has been used with, not necessarily with a gun, with a fire gun, but also with like suffocation, strangulation, poisoning. No? So there is this type of violence, and we have a lot of institutions that are trying to tackle that type of violence. But the thing is that in Mexico, and I think it would be interesting to hear what you think if this happens also in other parts of the world, the violence that women have been experiencing is also affected by the context of the violence outside, no? So in the past years, we have been having an increase on homicides, a very, very important increase in homicides in Mexico. So just for saying an example, from 2007, and I have some graphs that I can show, but I don't know if you have I don't know if you can see them. Let me see. I'm gonna try to share my I'm sorry, I was trying to share my screen. Do you see me? Yes. Okay. So I don't know if you can see these graphs.
Yes, you can, Monica. Gracias.
Okay. And I'm sorry that it's in Spanish, but I'm gonna explain it. So this is the homicide rates from 2000 to 2017. The blue one shows the male.
The blue is the male and the green is female. So what Monica's trying to get at is that violence in Mexico has very different consequences for women and for men, and where it takes place also has very different consequences. So in the private sphere, women's femicides or the homicides of women have remained constant, but outside the home in the public spaces, homicides of women have increased at even a higher rate than men's, even though absolute numbers are still very much lower for men than they are than they are for women. More men are being killed, but women are being killed at higher rates outside the home. So that is where these graphs are leading to. And I know it's sometimes very difficult to understand these very delicate issues in technical terms, but what we've seen with civil society work specifically is that data is very important in order to monitor and track precisely these events. And it's very important in order to prosecute and to bring justice to these women and to their families. So that is why we wanted to highlight this specific topic on data and how civil society is currently using data analysis to really understand and create a consensus on the definition of femicide, because it's very important if government is actually going to prosecute and going to follow up. And also these crimes are prosecuted at the local level. So that is why it's also very important to have one definition at the local level. And thank you everyone for following with me. And we have Monica back, so it's perfect.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Yes, I gave him a brief example, a brief explanation of what we were getting at. But thank you, Monica. We have you back. So.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So this is a graph that shows the violence against women by age group. So as you can see, the most affected by the violence in the country are those from 20 to 27 and 28 to 31 years. No? They follow the same trend, except all of them except from 65 and on. No? And the rate has increased in these years from almost 4 times for these two groups of women. So we have this contextual violence that's also happening not only in the public spaces, but also in households. So this graph shows this red with lines, sort of the pink one, shows the violence that's happening in the public space. Males on the right side, I think for you, and female on the left side. So as you can see, there are different patterns going on between women and men, but the most important type of violence right now is on the public space, which was something that didn't happen before. The green one is the violence in households, homicides in households. So it is much bigger for women than men, no? The other thing I wanted to show, just to talk a little bit about the contextual violence that has been also affecting this violence against women, is this graph that shows how women are being killed in comparison to men. So here you can see in the left hand, I don't know if it's right or left for you, but this one shows 64.5% of homicides for men with gunfire, and the other one is 41% in comparison, but still is the main source of homicide for women still. The green one is, the pink one is suffocation, and the yellow ones are other types of guns, not guns, like knives, for example. So we can see that there is a difference, no, in how people are being, women or male are being killed. And just lastly, because I'm gonna get to the point, I'm gonna get to the question Danny asked, I promise, is that even though this type of violence have been, this contextual violence has been affecting a lot women as well as men, the differences between the way women are being killed are still persistent. So here, just an example is to show where women are murdered in comparison to men, and how. The top part of the graph shows the male, and the bottom part shows the women. So the proportions are very different if you compare women in household homicides and men in public spaces, no? Which is this one. Men in public spaces are killed by 70% gunshots, in comparison to women that are killed 32% in their households by a gun. However, if we compare, for example, killing using, suffocation, that is the pink one, only 4% of the males are suffocated in the public space in comparison to 20% of females that are suffocated in their households. So this is just to say that what we have found is that even though women have this persistent type of violence, such as like the traditional femicide violence, we are also affected by the violence that is contextual, that has to do with the public space and mainly with gunshots. And this has to do with the increase of homicides in the past 10 years, that has a lot to do with the gun related to the crime violence, no? What we have found and what we have been working in Mexico is that there is this traditional idea as well that the violence against women is mainly it follows a pattern, like almost a linear pattern, that it starts with something symbolic, and then it starts climbing up, no? Then there starts the fighting, and then the violence, it starts increasing. All of our institutions are generated to tackle this type of violence, but not the other one. So if we're focusing only in this type of violence, that proportionally is small in comparison to the other violence, we're not tackling the whole problem. In Mexico, we don't have a way of asking if this type of violence that is typically thought to be incremental, actually it is. Because we don't have a system that allows us to understand if we find a body today, a femicide, or an homicide of a woman, we cannot know if this woman went before to an hospital. We don't know if this woman went before to a refugee. We don't know if this woman went to the police.
Monique,
so we cannot understand the full trajectory.
I'm gonna, if we can wrap up. I know there were some technical difficulties, but if you could wrap up in the next minute or so, it would be great, because we have one more panelist. But thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, so this is the main problem right now in Mexico. We cannot understand if the women that are being found dead have followed a specific pattern on trying to seek help. We think they might, but we don't understand. We cannot say it fully. So we are now working with the government to generate these type of systems that are interconnecting the different places in the country, the hospitals, the refugees, and the police systems, to understand how can we prevent this pattern to end in a femicide. So I think I'm gonna wrap it up right now. I don't know. I hope it heard well. I'm sorry for the internet and the technical difficulties.
Yes. Thank you very much, Marlene. And again, thank you for highlighting all the technical issues for understanding violence against women that has escalated to such an extent in Mexico and Latin America. And in Mexico, we are living times of extreme violence. So it is a very important issue. And so thank you very much, Monica. And last, we have one more speaker. It is Ardra. She is currently the campaign manager for the Global 16 Days campaign at the Center for Women's Global Leadership. In 2017, Ardra served as a policy consultant for the UN DESA, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, where she worked on an indicator to measure global migration. Ardra is also a poet, a published poet, and she will tell us more about what actions we can take, and she will, if you can please talk to us a little bit more about exactly what is the Global 16 Days, and if you could talk a little bit also more about the ILO Convention 190, and also what actions we can take and how we can become involved in these movements to put in our little grain of sand as well. So thank you very much, Ardra.
Thank you, Denny, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Margarita, for this invitation. It's wonderful to be part of this great meeting and this very important conversation today. So today I thought I'll give you all a brief overview about the Global 16 Days campaign. And I'll give you a brief overview about the campaign and also talk about the theme this year, the 2019 theme, which is ending gender-based violence in the world of work. And also talk about the ILO Convention 190, which talks about violence and harassment in the world of work. So that's just a brief overview. So talking about the origins of the Global 16 Days campaign, in June 1991, participants from 21 countries were convened by Center for Women's Global Leadership at the Women's Global Leadership Institute. And all of them, they were actually reflecting on all forms of gender-based violence, and they were trying to understand what is a common theme which was running across like different participants from different countries. And there was a greater realization that gender-based violence is a human rights issue, and we should emphasize this. And it was based on that, the dates between November 25th and December 10th. So that's a global 16 days campaign period was chosen. So it was a recognition that, as you know, 25th is the International Day Against Violence Against Women, and December 10th is the World Human Rights Day. So the clear choice of these dates was to emphasize that women's rights are human rights, right? And also in 91, CWGL actually launched a petition drive, and we are actually talking about a time when internet was not popular. So during that time, they actually circulated it in 24 languages. The petition was translated, and it was circulated among 115 countries with over 100,000 signatures, handwritten signatures during that time. And this was in June, again, 1991. And we know that in 1993, at the Vienna Conference, World Conference on Human Rights, it was finally recognized that women's rights are human rights. So it was just about, I think, CWGL's journey also reflects other feminist journeys around the world. So yeah, that's interesting that way. And since 91, Global 16 Days campaign has been joined by over 6,000 plus organizations in 185 plus countries. So reaching over 300 million people. So that's the current reach. And since 91, we have had themes, yearly or bi-yearly themes. And in 2017, we conducted an assessment to understand what are the shortcomings and also the successes of these campaigns. And it was realized that, no, we shouldn't just stop with these 16 days of activism. It should be extended beyond that. So currently, institutionally, we are focusing on 365 days of activism against gender-based violence. And it's 16 to 365 days now. And as I mentioned, we have yearly themes, and theme for this year is ending gender-based violence in the world of work. And this coincides with a very milestone convention, International Labour Organization Convention, which was adopted earlier in June this year, ILO Convention 190, which talks about violence and harassment in the world of work. And also it also comes with a recommendation 206. So this year we are focusing on ending GBV in the world of work, plus we have a specific global ask, which is to ratify this convention. So yeah, that's a goal of this year's campaign. And talking about this campaign, it's a legally binding convention, and that's very crucial. And we are just, as we understand it, we have very basic minimum standards. And we feel that if countries can ratify it, they can put in national laws in place, which can be adapted by employers to come up with redressal mechanisms to address both violence as well as harassment. And I thought I'll actually go over some of the specific provisions of this convention so that you have a broad overview about what this convention is. Firstly, the definition of violence and harassment. So the convention defines this as unacceptable behaviors and practices which result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm and includes gender-based violence and harassment. So that way you can see that the definition is very comprehensive. And also another definition, the protection of worker under this convention, I'll just read it out. It includes employees as defined by national laws, but it also includes persons working irrespective of their contractual status. And that includes persons in training, including interns and apprentices, workers whose employment has been terminated, volunteers, job seekers, and job applicants. So as you can see, it's a very inclusive definition about what a worker is, or who a worker is. And thirdly, this is my favorite part of the convention, how it actually defines the world of work. It doesn't say workplace, but it's a world of work. And I can just, again, discuss the provisions here. So it includes what is the workplace, which can be public and private spaces where they are a place of work, right? It can be the office space or physical environment per se. And then it includes places where the worker is paid, take a break or rest, uses sanitary, washing and changing facilities. So that's another provision. Work in the world of work also includes work-related trips, travel, training, events or other social activities. It also includes work-related communication, which includes anything ICT-related communication, internet technologies, right? Any harassment on that platform. Then it includes employer-provided accommodation, and also when commuting to and from work. So as you can see, it's a very comprehensive understanding about what the world of work is. And fourthly, I think another very important acknowledgement that this convention makes is drawing the linkages between domestic violence and workplace harassment. So for them, domestic violence is a workplace issue, and as you can see, domestic violence affects work, productivity, health, safety, and all of that. And this convention, it comes with this recommendation 206. It specifically talks about granting leave for victims of domestic violence, and also making flexible working arrangements in these spaces. So that's another important provision of this convention. And lastly, regarding the convention, it caters to the needs of, yes, women workers and also other vulnerable groups. That's the term used by the convention. And we at CWGL elaborate this vulnerable group as including women workers, indigenous groups, workers with disability, workers LGBTQ communities, and workers with HIV or AIDS, and migrant workers. So that's how we understand these vulnerable groups, and we hope this convention caters to them. Currently, we have been strongly pushing for the ratification of this convention. That's the goal, as I mentioned, this year. And the convention will enter into force, and after 2 countries have ratified it, it will enter into force after 12 months. That's how it proceeds. And currently 10 countries have expressed their willingness to ratify this convention. They are Argentina, Belgium, Iceland, Ireland, Namibia, Philippines, South Africa, Uganda, and Uruguay. So these are the 10 countries. Let's hope that we have more countries lined up soon as well. And already in some countries there are existing laws that already address these issues. So in those cases, we are hoping that there should be stronger implementation and enforcement of this convention in these areas. And yes, laws are finally very important, but at the same time, I think what I actually personally learned from this panel today is it's important to focus on attitudinal changes, behavioral insights. So it's all about, at the end, changing gender stereotypes, and also about challenging, gender-based power relations at work. So I think that's the key to addressing any form of gender-based violence. And yeah, all of my colleagues at the panel today were highlighting that issue too. So to just wrap it up, our campaign actually begins on Monday, November 25th. And we would love it if you're all part of this campaign. And in terms of specific engagement, yes, we are active on social media. And we have it's at 16 days campaign, that's the handle. We are active on Facebook as well as Twitter, so if you want to join any conversations. And also we are actively using 2 hashtags this year, which is hashtag 16 days campaign and hashtag ratify ILO 190, which is a specific global ask this year. And secondly, as I said, we have a digital platform set up for our campaign, which is 16dayscampaign.org. So you can visit our website. And we have already put up a digital map featuring 16 days activities from all over the world. So if any of you, in your individual capacity or as an organization, you're organizing any of these events, please do submit the events to us. There is a link on the website to submit your events so that we can feature them, moving towards the campaign period. And lastly, in October, we have also released a campaign guide which focuses on the theme this year, ending GBV in the world of work. So in case you need resources and tools, you can actually use our campaign guide. It's again on the website. And lastly, yes, I would like to share another important announcement with you all today. This happened last week in Nairobi Summit, at the ICPD Summit in Nairobi. And at the request of UNFPA, we at CWGL, we are announcing December 6th as a day of remembrance and for bringing accountability to femicide. So this December 6th, during the campaign period, it's a day of action, which will be focused on femicide. And as most of you are aware, in the US, there was a reason to want to join the conversation on that particular day. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will leave space for questions now. I believe Margarita will head this next part of the conversation, but those who can stay for the next half hour, we really encourage to continue this discussion, and we're really looking forward to hearing from our audience as well. So please, if anybody wants to start, Margarita.
Maybe somebody wants to stretch.
Yeah, so a quick break also.
Are you stretching his reply, or do you want to take notes for Q&A? I'm done. Like, I'm good. Whichever. Do you want? Are you tired of taking notes? Okay.
I was fascinated by the data because nobody has enough data in terms of a lot of things. So it's open for questioning. Or, yeah, please. Any questions to address to our? Yeah.
This is a very ignorant and technical question, but I'm even on your website and it simply says ILO. Doesn't define what that stands for.
Okay, so the convention that you're talking about is the ILO.
ILO Convention 190.
190. Thank you. It's the International Labour Organization.
It's an arm of the United Nations.
Anybody else?
But well noted. I mean, I'll make sure that that's correct.
The acronyms are challenging when you get into a new place. Oh, sorry.
We have a couple of questions from the Zoom call, so I'm just going to read them out. Okay, this is from Jean Sarson. Because there are still significant gaps in global knowledge regarding forms of VAWGs, this means that there are forms of violence that are still not legally acknowledged and named. Therefore, we need to find a way to put evolving data that is not on the legal books. Is there any place for this that could receive and gather data? So that's question one. And then we have another one. I note that the term, this is from Jean Sarson as well. I know that the term being referred to is mistreatment. However, the violence can go beyond mistreatment because I work with women and children who have endured non-state torture perpetrated by parents or spouses and others. My question is, does this research apply only to, quote, mistreatment? And what are the behaviors that identify mistreatment versus other forms of life-threatening violence?
I think those questions relate to the lady that was speaking from Mexico.
Relate to what?
Monica, is it able to get Monica back on the screen?
Yeah, I think questions
The later
I can answer.
or Marta wants to get answer.
Does anybody want to answer? Okay.
The later one that was about the use of the term mistreatment. I think that it is in one of the slides that I showed. That's why I'm assuming it refers to that part. But I totally see the point of the person raising this comment in the sense that to what extent is it too much of a soft term to denominate such a harsh reality. The rationale for labeling, in this case, violent behavior as mistreatment was more around what we denominate, or what is known as legality heuristics, is the fact that we normally associate things with whatever is most recent or easy to recall in our memory. And part of the challenge that in many cases campaigns to mobilize people around intimate partner violence or gender-based violence face is that they normally portray only the hardest forms of violence, such as femicide, or in many cases, very extreme cases of physical violence, which it is for sure the rationale around raising awareness, but it can also backfire in the sense that if I am someone who is suffering psychological violence, economic violence, and I only see that these services for survivors, particularly in these kind of interventions, that we're trying to draw survivors to help services. So if I see the communication material and it only refers to femicide, there is this danger that potential survivors that could benefit from these, but are experiencing other forms of violence, are not going to identify and are going to say, no, this is someone, particularly if you have that optimist bias of no, my situation is not that bad, this doesn't apply to me. So what we were trying to mitigate was that risk, that only those in the most extreme positions or situations would identify that this was a message for them.
For the first question, if someone can
Did Jean respond?
repeat.
Source.
Monica.
Oh, you're asking me?
Oh.
Can you repeat the question?
I don't have it anymore because the thing knocked out. Do we have a chat history?
I think that's on the website. I didn't write it down.
That's okay. I'll look for it. I'm sorry. We don't have it right now.
All right, you're looking for it. Anybody else has some questions or for our wonderful panel here, and also for Dani, if you want to ask questions to Dani as well. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'd like to ask Mishka. You mentioned denormalizing violence in your talk in Australia, and I'm just curious in general. In a practice, is it something that in your process, are you denormalizing this with the person who has committed the violence, or is it worked on within a community level? Is there a specific age group? What to say?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to. So is this in relation to FGM or the?
I thought oh, sorry, you said Australia. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Australian accent, Australian case study. Easy to get confused.
Yes, knowing.
I didn't look back at my notes.
No worries, no problem at all. Yes, in the case of Australia, what I was meaning is to what extent in those restraining orders can we insert a message that challenges that normalization, right? Like in many cases, the problem is to what extent do you assume that this is what relationships entail, that this is like you normalize it, you downplay like how severe this is. So try and we incorporate it in some of those redesigned restraining orders with the objective of increasing the effectiveness in terms of changing behavior and that people were not breaching that or those orders and reducing recidivism. But part of the insights from behavioral science literature around how we are all influenced by social norms, so how can we play the reverse in a sense and convey messages around how violence is not the norm in the society we live in. So in a sense, we all take this reference group of what the people around us do, right? So convey, in this case, to perpetrators through the orders that the majority of relations are not violent or do not entail violence.
We have a clarification here. Jean's question. You got that?
You got it? Okay.
For Monica?
For Monica. Okay.
Okay, hi Monica. This is from Jean. We have two questions. The first one is, because there are still significant gaps in global knowledge regarding forms of VAWGs, this means that there are forms of violence that are still not legally acknowledged and named. Therefore, we need to find a way to put evolving data that is not on the legal books. Is there any place for this that could receive and gather data? So that's question one. And the second question is, I note that the term being referred to is, quote, mistreatment. However, the violence can go beyond mistreatment because I work with women and children who have endured non-state torture perpetrated by parents or spouses and others. My question is, does this research apply only to, quote, mistreatment? And what are the behaviors that identify mistreatment versus other forms of life-threatening violence? Thank you.
The second question was answered. Now the first one we have from Monica. Did you hear us?
Check all the data.
Yeah, the data. The data question.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you, Monica.
Okay. I don't know if there is a big platform where we can check all of the data. I don't think there is. I think we should be doing an effort on having this. We have one in Mexico. We did it in the NGO I work with, and I can share it with you in Twitter or through Skype. And it's a platform where you can check all of the data regarding to gender violence that is available. I think we still have to do a lot of work on, along with the families and the victims, to gather data from them. I think at the same time we should be pushing for our governments to generate more data, particularly on what type of women are living this violence. We have been, in Mexico at least, we failed completely to have data from, for example, Afro-descendant women, or data on femicides on women that have different disabilities. So we have, or not to talk about indigenous people, for example, we have no data on that. So we're only gathering a specific type of the data for specific women, no? Which also can reproduce a lot of the biases that we are that we have as a society, as a justice and as a justice system in Mexico. And for the second question, I would say that the type of violence we focus on is both of first type of violence is the one that you are referring to, that has to do with probably family members or people that are close to the victim, relatives or maybe a sentimental partner. But we also focus on the violence that is generated outside the household, and that one of the big issues we have with the data, the governmental data, is that we don't know a lot about who are the perpetrators. So this is also a problem. We are focusing mainly on the victims and not on the perpetrators, and I think that's something that is also reproducing in Latin America at least, and this has to do with the focus we put the violence with. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Just two things. Jean's questions come. She does very important work in Canada on the Indigenous, that's the context of her question, particularly around disappearance of women. What I just want to tell the group, if you want to read and prepare for Beijing Plus 25, what you can do is go on UN Women's website or our website on the Beijing Plus 25, and you can look at all of the country reports. Countries have put in their reports talking about what they have done since Beijing Plus 20. Now, every country has a chapter on violence against women and girls, and it's quite an education looking at them. But also, NGOs have their reports. A lot of NGOs have reports, which sometimes I think might be more honest. It depends on the country. But you can learn a lot. The United States has not done a report. I worked a lot on this for Geneva and the UNECE. So first I thought, I'll be Sweden, that will be really safe. First paragraph, honor killings. That kind of blew me away. But if you look at it, you can learn an incredible lot about violence against women and girls. So I suggest you do it.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, I've got one here, and then one there.
Doing well. So the question that I have, and it actually obviously focuses on girls, right?
because we've been really talking on the side of women predominantly. And it is really about shifting behavior and changing behavior for girls, right? And also boys, right? Because obviously the perpetrator, getting back to that. So when we're thinking about that, how do we shift that behavior, right? In terms of...
Anybody wants to answer that one, or do we have one more question before we answer this one? You want to answer that? Yeah. Okay. So, Bert?
Thank you very much for that question. That leads on to some of the other proven case studies that I didn't quite get a chance to cover. But essentially, I'm sure most of you are aware of comprehensive sexuality education. You know, this is one of the program and policy responses that the US and others try consistently to water down. In other circles, they will question the proven evidence of CSE actually having a profound impact. And that is partly because where countries and where organisations have tried to implement CSE, there hasn't been a consistent approach. There hasn't been resources dedicated for a long-term approach or a longitudinal study to demonstrate the shift in attitudes and the shift in norms that's required, you know, because this takes many, many years. However, there is emerging evidence to demonstrate that when you implement CSE in a consistent fashion, when you're addressing issues like power relations, when you are talking about gender equality, and when you are talking about gender as something that is different from sexuality, and where a conversation space is provided to talk about different genders, then you actually do start to see a shift. And we see that at Plan International, where we have implemented that in schools, and where it's actually led to a lowering of violence within the school environment. And it has actually led to more gender equal relations between the boys and between the girls. And so I think we can only extrapolate that to know that if that is done on a consistent basis, then we will start to see those shifts.
Anybody wants to add anything? You had a question from here?
Yes. Okay, this is from Rosa Lizard from the Feminist Task Force. She says, bravo, panelists and Danny and moderators. How do we get to expedite the work on the attitudinal changes needed to counter VAW and GBV? Perhaps directed to Marta and Ardra, who mentioned it. We have another question from Patricia Bradley. Is violence against teenage women and girls in middle school and high school with their young boyfriends being addressed or researched?
Yeah, wants to go here? Wants to start answering?
To the first question about changing attitudes, I think, the way I see it is we need a multi-tiered approach. By changing it can happen at home, it can happen within the community, it can happen at your workplace, or so I see it as different layers, and it also boils down to how do we change attitudes among men, right? Yeah, I think we've been mostly talking about women today, but how do you change attitude? How do we make sure that they actually buy in and they are actually like equal partners when we implement these projects? So I think it actually it depends on a lot of like creating awareness, campaigns, and I think with internet and social media we have a huge possibility there. We are able to especially with mobile phone penetration in many of these zones, we are able to actually reach many communities. So I feel that we should make the best use of these possibilities, especially internet and social media, and also repackage our content in a way which reaches them. So sometimes we may have to translate these. As I mentioned, all these ILO convention and others might consist of very jargons. So I think it's also about our individual responsibility to translate them and talk to our community members at the local level, and also involve more NGOs at the national level, right? We're talking about, so it's for me it's also about bridging local activism with global dialogue.
So yeah, that's how I broadly look at it.
So to the first question, and how can we make progress, move forward this agenda? I think on that end, a lot of the work we're trying to do, or a lot of, I believe, the danger in many of these areas is that many of these declarations stay as declarations, right? Like that leap of how do we make these international or national level policies trickle down and actually affect the well-being of women and girls in this case. We try to focus to a great extent in those last mile problems, like how do we get help to those who need it? How do we change the behavior of perpetrators, of the community? You know? And I think in that, this is an area where there is a scarcity of evidence on what works. Like I think we still need to learn quite a bit on what are effective interventions, because sadly it is a complex problem in which it is difficult to move the needle. That being said, and I'll link it to the second question about how can we support women and girls, related to what Mishka was mentioning. For example, we're doing quite a bit of work with the International Planned Parenthood Federation on how can we help them improve the effectiveness of their comprehensive sexual education programs. And in a sense, I believe there is quite a bit we can do as well. I think it was highlighted on many of the speakers of the importance of intervening at a young age and have information. And for example, there's a lot we can do around how can we train girls at a young age to recognize patterns of violence. How can we use, for example, there's a lot of evidence around how when we make concrete plans, specific plans about how we are going to undertake a given behavior, that helps overcome that intention action gap. Because we all know that while changing attitudes is important, the gap in between attitudes and behaviors is not a straightforward transition. Like how many things do we ourselves believe and then do not implement in our daily life? We all know that we should be healthier. We all know there is like that intention to action gap. So how can we, for example, provide girls with tools such as the rules of thumbs, concrete plans on how can we're working in South Africa and an intervention around this, and how can you navigate those difficult situations and conversations and prompt them to make a specific, if their plans of when this happens, this is how I'm going to handle this situation. So definitely an area to explore, and that I'm like also very inspired by all the comments and all the work that is being done by different organizations in the room. But I think there's definitely still a lot to learn, but that I hope like with these different stakeholders, little by little we'll be needing an agenda or global knowledge of what works in particularly the field of girls and adolescents.
I think the questions have been covered quite comprehensively by my colleagues, but I just wanted to add that in terms of violence that happens in schools between boys and between girls, often education is this panacea to gender equality. Girls go to school and gender equality will eventually happen. Well, we know that schools are a domain of violence perpetrated by teachers, perpetrated by boys. And so I think that there is an absolute need for there to be sectoral plans, so educational plans that are gender sensitive. So that means not just CSC, but also gender sensitive educational programs across the whole, with the sensitization of teachers and all stakeholders around the educational institution. But also to say that with schools, I feel like we have a system and a structure to work with. My concern are for the girls that drop out of school, often because of early pregnancy. In a lot of countries, there's still laws prohibiting girls from going to school once they do fall pregnant. And then that is when they fall between the gap, or the crack, sorry. And it's just much harder to reach those girls who are out of school. And especially for those girls who have already had children, we know that levels of violence are very, very high in households where early marriage and where early pregnancy or early childhood has taken place. And they are also often forgotten in the programs, you know. So we try and prevent early pregnancy, early marriage, but what happens to those girls when they have become pregnant or have been married? So absolutely, educational institutions, but we also need to take care of those girls that have dropped out. Yeah.
No early marriage, no early.
We have a comment on Facebook.
So I just wanted to add, again coming back to the attitudinal change question, how do we actually make sure that, how do we teach our women and girls to just speak up when they're actually faced with an instance of violence, and also initiate a conversation about gender equality even at a very young age. I think that's kind of in addition to education that you mentioned, because and personally for me, I grew up in South India, which is Kerala. And growing up, I know I grew up with all these gender stereotypes, and I was told that I couldn't laugh out like loudly. You know, I should be quiet. And personally, for me, it's actually a process of unlearning now, or maybe relearning, if you want to call it that. So I think it's all about how do we make sure that they speak up and make sure that there are safe spaces where, you know, if a girl is actually, she's faced with violence in her school, whom does she go to and report this, right? She might be feeling like threatened to go to a teacher and complain about it, or to share with other students. So I think it's all about creating safe spaces. Yeah.
All right. I know we're almost out of time.
Just one more question here to answer, and then after that,
Because somebody's correcting a question that was not answered. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just have a quick question for Marta. Should I just go ahead and stand? I'll just stand.
Yeah.
So I know that you had done some gender-based violence outreach in places like Egypt and Georgia. I was curious to know the exact approach that was taken. I know we've talked a lot about protecting the rights of women. I was curious to know if you did any education that addressed the perpetrators of those who were enacting these crimes. I also had a question about the updates that were done, and I can go ahead and ask that as well. Can I go ahead and ask that? Sure. Okay, so I'm here representing Queen Mother Dr. Dolores Blakely, and she was very much interested in learning more about the Apollo Theater event. We'll talk about that. Okay, she would like to be on the committee. So
Absolutely. Well, she has to come to planning committee
Okay.
December 2nd.
December 2nd? I'll let her know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Or send somebody.
Okay.
All right. So that question that keeps circling back from Jean Sarson, I think they want to really hear about non-state torture. So trafficking, prostitution. I don't know. I mean, we're almost out of time.
It's not my area.
Yeah. All right. We don't. That's fine. We can just say we don't have an area of expertise in that. Can I be heard? And then just one final question that really is interesting. It says, is there any existing documented guideline or procedure for case management used by social workers while handling child sexual abuse? So people have access, you know, so that we can identify children who are being abused. It's an interesting question because we see scenarios on buses or play dates, and how do we do?
To the first question on work with perpetrators, definitely I think it is two sides of the problem, and in a sense the perpetrator is the source of the problem, so we should definitely work on that front. Of the examples I presented, Georgia was focused on help sitting and prompting bystanders to take action. In Australia, it was more, how can we do those messages to the perpetrators, and in this case, perpetrators that we already know have a criminal conviction, to get them to change their behavior and reduce residues in this case, and respect the restraining orders against them. And we also have done other work on, for example, how can you get perpetrators to attend court hearings, to attend therapy, to attend like other alternatives to within the criminal justice system of other types of programs that do not necessarily entail prison or bad. Definitely agree with your point that it is a big aspect of the problem that we should be working on and building evidence around what is effective to change that. And for example, also on that end, I think it is not only with perpetrators or people who we know that have already committed violence, but also there's a prevention component to it, right? In Liberia, we were helping develop, contributing to develop behavioral findings from behavioral literature, a program around how to be a modern man. Like, what does it mean to redefine masculinity and detach that from violence?
Thank you. Okay, I think we need to cut it off. Thank you all for coming, and I know I have learned a lot, and I hope we can charge ahead with new ideas and new courage to keep on going there. So thank you very much, and see you another time.